Ah, New York City, where the rent can overwhelm even the hardest working trust fund kids, the rats can chew through the mighty plastic bags of garbage we leave on the sidewalks, and the cars fly through the streets at a brisk stop. It's truly the greatest city on earth. But on January 5th, 2025, New Yorkers turned their backs on their God-given right to sit in bumper-to-bumper traffic for hours by implementing a policy known as congestion pricing. Basically, if you want to drive your car into one of the most congested cities on the planet, now you pay a toll. And wouldn't you know it, it's working really well. But then President Trump stepped in and issued an executive tweet to stop the policy. You remember the tweet? It was the one where he posted that AI-generated picture of himself as king and kind of freaked a lot of people out. Well, New York thinks that maybe you can't do that, so they kept the policy in place, and now I guess we're going to court to see if a states' rights small government president can big government a states' right away. Hi, I'm Rollie Williams, a guy with a climate science and policy degree and a promise to say I'm walking here at some point in the next 20 minutes, and this is a video about New York's battle with traffic. Welcome to Climate Town. In the United States, we love to drive. Our elderly drive, our teens drive, even our children drive.
He drove his great-grandmother's car more than a mile on a busy road in Minnesota.
Where were you going?
To the gas station.
How come?
Because I have reasons.
We love driving so much that we paved as much of America as we possibly could. We even spent hundreds of billions of dollars of federal taxpayer money on the interstate highway system. We worship cars. We give them the sides of the streets to park on. We give them extra lanes on highways for more cars, and now they can go faster. Oops, oh, there's more traffic. Oh, just add another lane, and there we go. Whoops, there's traffic again. Well, we'll fix it, and we'll use taxpayer money because everybody loves cars. And after a century of being showered with gifts, cars and their infrastructure have completely taken over American life. You just got a massive chunk of land to build your new restaurant? No, actually, you're about to be the proud owner of a paved parking lot with a tiny food service problem. Or maybe you're someone who lives in the city of Houston. Not there, you're not. Or there, or there. That's where the cars live. And they love it here. Or maybe you're trying to write the Pixar movie Cars, and you have to dream up a world that's designed for cars rather than humans. You start by deleting the people, and you're done, because we already have that. And I'm not saying there's no upside to being able to drive practically anywhere you want for almost nothing. But after 100 years of giving away massive subsidies and publicly funded infrastructure to cars, maybe it's time to see if people actually love cars as much as our taxpayer dollars imply. And that brings us to congestion pricing. But don't worry, because this is truly a high school economics level concept. Almost every road in the United States is completely free to use. Our entire society is planned around the economic incentive of this socialized infrastructure. And because roads are such an insanely good deal for people with cars, it is non-stop Black Friday smashing into the front door of a Walmart on a lot of roads in populated areas.
One sales rep climbing on a table to escape the crowd.
But while we use taxpayer money to build and maintain road infrastructure, only people with access to a vehicle can actually drive on it. And since it's expensive to buy, maintain, fuel, store, and insure a car, that makes roads less of a free gift for everyone and more of a matching grant that the government will give you if you can first afford to pay a bunch of money to have a car of your own. Estimates put the full cost of car ownership at about $12,000 per year on average. So free roads are a great deal if you're rich and kind of a shit deal if you don't have an extra $12K a year lying around. But for almost all the US, car infrastructure is so dominant and alternate transportation is so non-existent that you are functionally required to own a car if you want to participate in modern society. And yes, about a quarter of that road infrastructure cash does come from a tax on gasoline that drivers pay directly, but the vast majority of the money for America's free roads is taken from the general public and then redistributed only to the people who can afford a car. And also, this is crazy. Cars do this weird thing where they constantly vent dangerous particulate matter and greenhouse gases into the open sewer that we sometimes refer to as outside. I mean, if car exhaust went back into the vehicle, the occupants would die in a matter of minutes. So instead we send it out into the world. No harm, no foul. Wait, I'm hearing now, no, car exhaust is linked to a gaggle of problems, including cardiovascular disease, respiratory issues, asthma, childhood leukemia, and of course, climate change. And just to say it, the people who live closer to traffic tend to make less money and experience these problems more. And also, cars just straight up kill more than 1 million people every year around the world in crashes and permanently disable millions more. But for the most part, we don't price the actual cost of any of these things into the cost of driving a car. Instead, we force society to absorb these costly externalities for the good of the motherland. So what if we made it a little less ridiculously cheap to use the most in-demand roads by charging drivers a little bit? You know, kind of like we do with everything else in society, like, oh, I don't know, just off the top of my head, food, shelter, and healthcare. In America, roads got all the communism. And I'm here to say, I don't think so. Dimitri? So let's price roads a little more fairly with congestion pricing. Basically, you mark out a zone that's constantly clogged with cars, and then you charge a fee for every car that enters that zone. And that's it. I mean, you can get way more intense with it, with dynamic prices at different times, and a bunch of other modifications for fairer pricing, or you can just start simple and easy. And the money you make from congestion pricing, you can spend on public transportation and further reduce the number of people who feel the need to drive their cars to Times Square to shop at the M&M store, and further increase the strength and use of your public transportation network. And that's the deal. That is truly what the president is in a fight with New York City about. This should not be controversial. This is just good urban planning policy. And like a lot of other seemingly great solutions to massive problems in the US, these are not ideas that we're just now thinking up. Here is lawyer/urban planning brainiac Ted Keel all the way back in 1969.
Equitable but sound transportation policy to have the motorist help subsidize mass transportation, because the subsidy he is getting for the privilege of driving to and from work in an automobile is so out of proportion to the mass subway rider, to the detriment even of the motorist himself.
That was 55 years ago. They were also correctly worried about what would happen to the environment if we continued to let cars take over the world.
We're talking about a quality of life in a city. And I think it's increasingly recognized that one of the unpleasant pressures of big city life is the strangulation of the gasoline engine that pollutes the air, fouls the streets, and grinds at the nerves.
I wonder what he means by grinding at the nerves. This is dangerous. This is dangerous. But despite the dire warnings of urban planners doing the math and then looking at it, 1960s New York failed to implement congestion pricing. Then in 1975, Singapore rolled out the world's first congestion pricing plan using the cutting-edge technology of police officers looking at cars. Then in 2003, London changed the game. They implemented a congestion pricing plan using the cameras they already had installed all over the financial district. Why did they have a bunch of cameras installed all over the financial district? Well, they were trying to stop the Irish Republican Army from bombing them so much. Why was the IRA doing that? I'm sure it wasn't no reason. Why don't you look it up? It's not technically related to this video. We just thought it was an interesting fact. When they flipped the switch, London's system charged drivers a flat fee if they drove into a zone in the center of the city between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. on a weekday. And London also made the bold decision to add 300 extra buses for people who wanted to switch to public transit. And it was a massive success right away. Within a few years, Transport for London reported that traffic was down 15% and congestion had dropped by 30%, while they had raised £122 million that mostly went to improving bus service.
The congestion charging scheme in London is one of the best transport initiatives for over a generation.
Some 29,000 more Londoners are using buses during peak time, with bus journeys at their highest since London Transport's heyday in the late 50s.
Well, it's very hard to bring them to mind. This is the thing. It's all right when your eyes are not going and happy as eyes.
Meanwhile, back across the pond, New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg was trying to get New York's groove back. Depending on your age, you might only remember Michael Bloomberg from the time he was murdered by Elizabeth Warren in the Democratic presidential primaries.
I'd like to talk about who we're running against. A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg. Democrats are not...
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
But in 2007, Mayor Bloomberg tried to pass congestion pricing in New York as part of a plan called Plan NYC. Plan NYC. It works better in writing than it does spoken. The success of congestion pricing in London, a city with a similar population, urban layout, and transportation system, got Bloomberg foaming at the mouth. Unfortunately, New York politics are a fickle mistress, and state Democrats didn't much care for that plucky billionaire. Plus, a general status quo bias and a jambalaya of other problems prevented congestion pricing from even getting a vote in the state assembly. Then, as New York grew and people continued to pour in, a completely unpredictable thing happened.
A horrendous morning commute that left thousands stuck on trains and in stations, sweating and hoping to get to work at some point.
Right now, the average speed of traffic in New York City is 5 miles per hour. That's 23% slower than it was in 2010.
It sounded like a big bump, like we hit something or something, and then the engine just went dead.
Blazing hell down there, everybody screaming and yelling, cops are down there.
They sent another car in to rescue us, to pull us out, and there was a problem with that car. So they had to rescue that one.
Someone with the Twitter handle Snowy McGrumpkin said, quote, "Hey, at MTA, my Friday feeling is hot, grumpy, and late."
Police describe it as near riot conditions. Now, this is not just disgraceful and frustrating, it's dangerous.
And by the way, I do feel a little bit bad for Governor Cuomo. He just happened to be governor in 2017. He had to pick up the pieces from the previous governor, who was also Andrew Cuomo, for 6 years. And in those 6 years, Governor Cuomo cut tolls on the Verrazano Bridge and pulled money from the MTA budget to cover the loss, pushed through a payroll tax cut that ultimately pulled money from the MTA, and consistently looked to divert MTA budget to cover other budget gaps. Cuomo even suggested that the state have a Please Help Good Idea sweepstakes where they would give $1 million for any good idea about what the fuck they could do with the subway. And through it all, it seems like Cuomo was able to avoid a lot of criticism from the public because some people didn't realize the governor is in charge of the MTA. But then the MTA finally got its savior, a man named Andy Byford, who had a history of turning struggling transit systems around, and it was going really great until he suddenly resigned less than 2 years in. We may never know why, but we do have this quote that might explain it. He increasingly clashed with the one official who has the final say over the subways, Governor Andrew M. Cuomo, who considers himself something of a modern-day master builder. What a guy.
Well, I don't really care what you think.
But amidst all the self-inflicted chaos, Governor Cuomo commissioned his own report called Fix NYC, which is much easier to say. Who cares who caused all these problems? There's no way to tell. We just gotta find a way to fix the traffic while also funding the subways. And guess what does both of those things? Start spreading the news. I'm leaving today. I wanna be a part of it. New York, New York. So who gives a shit that congestion pricing is simple and highly effective urban planning policy? Cuomo just needed the money to fix the subways, and wouldn't you know it, that's what got congestion pricing passed. And you don't get any more New York than that. So now it's finally time to implement congestion pricing.
Overnight, the number of cases surging to nearly 3,000 here in the United States.
Whoops, sorry about that. Okay, now it's really time for congestion pricing.
Andrew Cuomo, New York's politically pugnacious governor, calling it quits after an investigation by the state attorney general documented multiple sexual harassment allegations.
Oh, dang. Okay, but at least the new governor, Kathy Hochul, loves congestion pricing.
Well, then you love congestion pricing, right? Yeah! This is when we demonstrate leadership.
And in June of 2024, New York City became America's first.
I have come to the difficult decision that implementing the planned congestion pricing system risks too many unintended consequences for New Yorkers at this time. I have directed the MTA to indefinitely pause the program.
What the fuck are you doing, Kathy Hochul? You just said you love congestion pricing. You just spent $507 million installing the cameras. What are you doing?
And I'm proud to announce the MTA will implement a congestion pricing plan.
Whoo! Oh my God. Okay, so it looks like Kathy Hochul just paused congestion pricing so she could do a 4D chess move where she won some House seats from suburban Republicans, which didn't work at all, but whatever, it's back. And after decades of advocacy, congestion pricing officially started in New York City on January 5th, 2025.
So you want to drive your 2-ton vehicle into the most densely populated city in America? Here's what you gotta know. To enter this part of Manhattan between 5 a.m. and 9 p.m. on weekdays, you'll be charged $9 once per day. You can then drive in and out of the zone like an absolute psycho without additional charges. Motorcycles pay less, trucks pay more, and taxis and ride shares are eligible for a lower fee. If you're just passing through on the FDR West Side Highway or the Cary Tunnel, you get to skip the toll, and the price drops to just $2.25 if you're driving a car in at night.
But now that the cameras are on, there's one question on everybody's mind. Is congestion pricing working? Well, the short answer is yeah. The long answer is... And not to get too annoying here, but of course it worked. It's basic ass supply and demand economics that has already worked in several other cities, including one extremely similar to New York. And also, New York already has multiple other tolls for driving over bridges and through tunnels, and they work. Why wouldn't this one work? But I know what you numberheads want, some preliminary transit data. Whoa! Wildly faster commute times practically across the board. We're talking a 48% drop in commute times through the Holland Tunnel and 30% drops in times over the Williamsburg and Queensboro bridges. And that's not all. But first, the news at 5.
Latest NYPD numbers show major subway crime is falling. It comes as ridership is growing underground due to congestion pricing. Christy Collegian is live outside the West 72nd Street station. Good morning, Christy.
Good morning. Thanks, Christy. Pretty bold claim to make after just a couple of months of data, but according to the MTA, car traffic appears to be down by about 9% in February, correlating with a drop in emissions, and foot traffic appears to be up by about 5%, correlating with a rise in people saying, "I'm walking here." And if we zoom out, this is actually pretty groundbreaking. Sure, congestion pricing technically made $48.66 million for New York City in tolls in less than a month, but fewer people stuck in traffic means people are wasting less of their lives behind the wheel. Making roads free might feel equitable, but it really just means that everyone is equally allowed to lose hours of their lives. When you lose an hour, it's gone forever. But when you charge a fee, that fee sticks around and can be redistributed to make people's lives better and more efficient. The most vocal opponents of congestion pricing claim that they're worried about the blue-collar workers who have to pay this new fee, but forcing them to waste valuable hours stuck in gridlock traffic burning their own costly gasoline and being prevented from reaching a job site probably cost them a lot more than the toll. Congestion pricing is just a sensible piece of urban planning policy that people were initially mad about, but then they tried it, and now polls show that about 6 out of 10 New York voters and almost 7 out of 10 frequent congestion pricing zone drivers support the policy. Apparently, this whole pattern of we hate it, we try it, we love it happens whenever you do congestion pricing. And remember, the number of people driving into the city are a small fraction of the total number of people coming into Manhattan every day, so maybe paying attention to what drivers think isn't the best strategy. Video over.
The Trump administration appears to be pulling the plug on congestion pricing.
Okay, after about a month and a half of success, Trump activated his right as King of America to try to stop congestion pricing. But since a tweet is not an official act, Trump's Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, fired off a 3.5-page letter to tell Governor Hochul that the US government is doing a takesies-backsies of the legal authority to do congestion pricing. Can the government do a takesies-backsies? Legal experts think probably not, but they also thought you couldn't say you were the king, so who knows? The letter in question appears to be Duffy's best attempt at legally justifying Trump's tweet, but his two arguments almost immediately swerve into the oncoming traffic of reality. His first contention is that the congestion pricing program provides no toll-free option for many drivers who really want to bring their cars into New York, which would be a really great argument if there was a law or a rule or anything that said you had to provide a free option. Here's the thing. There's just not. That's not a law. I'm not even sure what that is. There's no free option for the subway. If you try to jump the turnstile, you can get ticketed or maybe even shot. And also, we already toll cars like $14 minimum for a round trip on these bridges and these tunnels. This is the same thing as that. I don't know what's going on. Kramer!
Well, where are we going? Just a little place I like to call You'll See.
His other argument is that the revenue generated under the program goes towards the transit system rather than the highways, which, yes, is correct. He goes on to argue that was his argument. That was the whole argument. Okay, well, here's the thing. I respect your opinion, but you're gonna need to make a legal case for this that cites something other than the Supreme Court landmark decision of Sean Duffy versus I don't like that. But if you try to call this man out on his bullshit, you might get something like this.
Is there any indication that you've seen so far that DEI practices factored into this accident?
I'll be specific on things that I want to talk about.
So, born-again congestion pricing advocate Governor Kathy Hochul had her MTA fire back with a 61-page lawsuit to take this thing to court, and then jumped on the microphone at a subway platform press conference to take a few shots of her own.
And I have to say this to Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy. It's not the real world, Sean. It's real life for New Yorkers.
Now, that real world comment might be a little confusing until you learn that Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy was a cast member on Real World Boston, and my God, we live in the dumbest timeline, don't we?
People try to downplay it like it's fake and, you know, these emotions that you feel aren't real and it's staged, and it's like, it's the most real experience that I've ever had.
That guy is the Secretary of Transportation. But then Governor Hochul throws down the gauntlet with the Trump administration.
The cameras are staying on. We are keeping the cameras on. Lights, cameras, action. They're staying on. Last thing I'll say, if in some world that they are successful, the next time you're stuck in traffic, the next time your train is delayed, the next time you're in a flooded station because infrastructure repairs were not made, I want you to think of this. Think about this. Next time you're stuck in traffic.
Okay, not the pop she was hoping for. You'd really want the crowd to react a little more like this.
Next time you're stuck in traffic.
But you know what? Good enough. The lines have been drawn, and we've gotten some interesting back and forth between New York and the Trump administration already, including an official US Department of Transportation video that's just 26 seconds of absolute dog shit production featuring 5 mumbly, unidentified men and more street noise than dialogue. You know what? I'm gonna play a clip of it, and I swear to you, I have not altered this video in any way.
It's ridiculous. It's destroying the city. I think it sucks.
It makes it more expensive for me to come to work.
The US government produced this video, and I would say they forgot to use a microphone, except you can see him holding a microphone in this shot. But I'm not trying to say New York completely nails this new policy. Since the point is to keep traffic flowing by pricing the roads based on demand, the best version would let the toll price fluctuate. Everything else changes price based on supply and demand. Congestion pricing could too, it just doesn't. Another issue with New York's system is the entire premise is based on the idea that the tolls would raise $1 billion per year. That $1 billion would then pay for bonds that give the MTA $15 billion for capital improvements. Is $15 billion enough? Hell no! They've been underfunding the transit system for years. They need more like $47.8 billion. But $15 billion is a great start. The thing is, when Governor Kathy Hochul paused and then unpaused congestion pricing, she knocked the toll down from $15 to $9, which will reduce the program's projected revenue to below the intended $1 billion, which will leave them drastically short on the money they needed to fix the trains. So I guess, checkmate, trains! You've been beaten once again by Chessmaster Hochul. But the bigger problem of tying the perceived success of congestion pricing to a subway system that's been a bit of a cluster since forever is that it gives opponents of the policy a nice, cheap talking point. Congestion pricing is already working, but if the trains don't look like the fucking Hogwarts Express by Christmas, you can bet your ass the Ben Shapiros and Sean Duffys of the world are gonna blame that on congestion pricing. And just to say it, the New York City subway kicks ass. I fucking love the subway. Every day, more people take the subway than fly domestically in America. The subway fucking rules. Sure, it's loud, and there are lots of delays and track failures, but by and large, the subway is the only way to travel. Yeah! Oh! Ooh, I love the subway! Sure, there are delays and signal failures, and one time when I was in the Bronx, somebody jumped onto the tracks and I saw the EMTs carrying his foot out in a Ziploc bag, and that's a true story that actually happened, but generally, this thing is incredible. When we shoot episodes of Climate Town, we use the subway to get around. But it could also be so much better. The trains are slow and often late, and a lot of the technology is so old that the companies that made it are no longer in business. We're talking like tech from the 1950s. And besides having general infrastructure problems, and I'm not sure what that's a puddle of, the subway currently serves this much of New York, which means this much of New York gets left out. And the people who live in these underserved, often lower income neighborhoods with large immigrant populations have had to organize their own dollar van systems to fill the chasm left by the MTA. Focusing congestion pricing money on just the MTA misses the larger point of the policy, which is to make everyone's life better. It's not just about the subway, it's also about blanketing the city in protected bike lanes and bus rapid transit and pedestrian areas, and I don't know, those freaky little one-wheeled motorcycle things. I don't care, let's just get some options. And not to chuff them up too much, but when London did congestion pricing, they gave one of those British middle finger gestures to cars by taking out driving lanes to make dedicated bike lanes while also beefing up the bus fleet and schedule. Basically, they made decisions to maximize London for moving people rather than cars. And according to an analysis from transportation economist Charles Komanoff, it fucking worked. In the past 20 years, automobiles driving into London's congestion zone decreased by 48%, but the total number of people coming into central London increased by 21%. We're talking a 137% increase in cycling, bus and train increases. I mean, it's almost enough to get past that awful British cooking Buzzinga. And to the people like Sean Duffy, who claim to be looking out for the hard-working, blue-collar American just trying to make ends meet,
it makes it more expensive for me to come to work.
To that argument, I guess I would just like to say, get the out of here. I mean, we can just look at the numbers. The staggering majority of people who are coming into New York are not driving. They're taking the subways and buses and trains and bikes. Just 20% of people traveling to or through the congestion zone in a vehicle are subject to the toll. And if you're worried about lower income New Yorkers coming into Manhattan, let's get into it. Just 2% of poorer outer borough commuters regularly drive to Manhattan for work. 2%. When there's a kind of milk that's the same percentage as the people you say you're worried about, your argument might have structural problems. If you're really worried about poor outer borough commuters, maybe take a second to consider the 25% of that same group that gets into Manhattan using the fucking MTA, the thing that will get better funding from congestion pricing. And if you're still hoping to be worried about outer borough drivers, you might be worried about the high-income residents. Yeah, the median income of car owners in the outer boroughs is $94,000, while non-car owners have a median income of less than half of that. We're not all statisticians, but let's take a second to try to find the trend here. As of right now, for me, not you, you're in the future, you spaceman, I'm in the right now, and right now, New York's toll cameras are still on, the cars are still moving faster, and the system is still collecting millions of dollars every month for public transportation. And even if New York decided to take all that money, put it in a big pile, and light it on fire, congestion pricing would still be a net positive because reducing traffic comes with a whole bunch of other co-benefits, including increasing the speeds of buses and decreasing emissions. And all of this is a really great first step in clawing back some of the ground that cars have taken from cities. Our roads are a finite and precious public resource, and cars are massive, lethal hunks of metal that have been grandfathered into privilege for so long that any attempt to correct this is met with a hysterical cry that there's a war on cars! Not to be confused with the urbanism podcast, The War on Cars, which is actually an excellent podcast and you should totally check it out. It's also good to remember that a lot of people live in these high traffic areas. Almost all the talk is focused on the commuters, but a ton of people will benefit from less exhaust pouring out into their neighborhoods. They'll also appreciate better bike lanes and safer crosswalks and a bunch of other improvements that we can actually make when we deprioritize trying to pack everyone else's personal vehicle into their front yard. And this kind of city is possible. In Paris, people are living entire lives on the streets, getting blasted on Bordeaux or talking about scarves or whatever. And they're not alone. A bunch of other cities around the world also do this. Have they all lost their minds? No, they're just considering people a little bit more. In New York, we got a taste of this during the pandemic when restaurants slapped together a bunch of sheds made of plywood and 2x4s and delicately crammed a bunch of extra customers right next to the curb. It was awesome. Until they ripped them all out to make more beds for our most cherished residents.
You settled down and you built a town and made it live.
It's like it was paved by angels.
Anybody know the cure for hiccups?
By the way, the Cars universe gets really crazy when you start asking questions. The internet is full of fun conspiracy theories about this. One might assume that this takes place in an alternate reality where the cars just built everything, but they have sidewalks on their streets. This world was built by humans, and then at some point, cars gained sentience, wiped out humanity, and are now living their lives cosplaying as the people they murdered. And the rabbit hole goes way deeper than that. They have a car pope. Sounds fun, he rides in a little Pope car, that's great. But it also means they have a car Catholicism and that at some point they crucified a car Jesus on a car cross. Also, there are planes that remember Car World War II, which has some pretty interesting implications for who led the Car World War II German army. They also have to take their tires off when they go through airport security, which means their tires are their shoes, not their feet, which means there's probably car terrorism. And then there's the question of how these cars are alive, but please don't Google it, because if you do, you'll get something like this. So at this point you might be wondering, what can I do about this? Not this, the movie Cars, this, the real world, not the show, the real world, the actual world that's dominated by cars. What can I do about that? Well, if you live in New York, you might be tempted to think that there's nothing left to do because congestion pricing's already in full swing. But unfortunately, it seems like there's gonna be a battle to keep it that way. So we teamed up with our friends over at Climate Change Makers to make a New York-focused playbook to help you tell Kathy Hochul how much you love congestion pricing. Maybe it's an email, maybe it's a phone call. Honestly, it's probably one of those two. But whether she likes it or not, she's the current leader of congestion pricing in the US, and we want to let her know that we think that's very good and smart. Here's the thing, if you don't live in New York, Do not email or call Kathy Hochul. I literally just learned this the other day, but apparently they find that very annoying, and they almost always ignore anything that isn't directly from their constituency. What you can do is send an email or call to your representative. I'd imagine cars play a substantial role in your area as well, and there are lots of urbanist policies to deprioritize car-centric infrastructure that you can chat with your reps about. And as long as you're poking around the internet, why not go follow some of the experts that we talked to in making this very video? I'm talking about Charles Komanoff, Jon Orcutt, Henry Grabar, Mike Manville, Doug Gordon, and Sarah Goodyear. We got links down below. They are all excellent advocates for more people-focused transportation systems. Check them out. And if you're looking to watch more videos about the potential for a future that isn't completely dominated by cars, might I suggest Great Cities from the powerhouse urban creator City Beautiful. It's a 7-episode series about the evolution of the places we sometimes take for granted, and my personal favorite is a deep dive into the history of Central Park. Not only was it one of the main filming locations for this very video, but it's also one of my favorite places to be in New York when the weather goes from complete garbage to pretty nice. Go remind yourself how insane it is that in the middle of some of the most expensive real estate in America, there's a massive public park. Pretty cool. You can find this and so much more over on Nebula, an independent ad-free streaming platform that's creator-owned and is a verifiable traffic jam of thoughtful content that can't be found anywhere else. Nebula is also the only place you can get early releases from our friends over at Not Just Bikes and the Urbanist Agenda, and guess what, friends? I'll sweeten the deal. I'm even on Nebula dropping early ad-free Climatown episodes before they premiere on YouTube. Nebula also has guest passes that you can give out to friends and family for a free week of Nebula, no payment info required. So scan the QR code or use the link nebula.tv/Climatown for 40% off. That's just $3 a month, which in most calculations rounds down to zero, so it's practically free. That's nebula.tv/Climatown. It's a ding-dang deal. All right, that's the end of the episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support us, the best place to do that is on our Patreon page. We got deleted scenes, behind the scenes footage, clips from the live show. There's even a Climatown phone number that you can call, and I legally have to answer it. That's a real thing we really do over on the Patreon page. So check it out if you feel like it. We also got t-shirts and hats, a podcast, and a newsletter. Links to all those down below. Okay.
I have not tried marijuana. I have never used it at any time.
Did you hear that pop?
Goodbye.